Alright, so this is going to be a video all about the Python basics. Namely, I'm going to be talking about variables and assignment operators in this video. So the first thing I want to talk about is that, first of all, this is going to be a comment right here. So it says represent a value with a variable. Now, what a comment is, it's not actually run by the computer. So this line right here is not actually going to be run. When I run this code, nothing happens, as you can see right here. Nothing's outputted over here. But this is just mostly for humans to read later on. So it's kind of like notes, little comments for whatever the code entails. So whenever you see that hashtag, this pound sign right here with something else after it, that's just a comment. All right, well, this first thing that we're going to be talking about in this video is representing a value with a variable, and we're also going to be determining the value of a variable as a result of an assignment. So that's the main thing that we're going to be talking about in this video, and then I'm going to be breaking it down based on those two objectives right there. So by the end of this video, you should be able to do these two things. Okay. So first thing you need to know is that a variable is an abstraction. So a variable is an abstraction that can hold a value. We talked about abstractions in class. It's abstracting away details is removing the complexity. You're not thinking about what's the underlying code behind it, the ones and zeros, the quantum mechanical level of what's going on with abstractions. And a variable is no different. It's going to be an abstraction. It holds a value, but you're not actually thinking about all the ones and zeros beneath it. You're just thinking about what this variable can do. Okay. The equal sign is really an assignment operator. So what that means is if you had a variable, let's just call it var a, and I set it equal to 3, what this means is var a is set equal to 3. It doesn't mean that it's equal to it because var a does not actually have a value until you set it equal to something. So that equal sign is actually an assignment operator rather than an equivalence statement. After it runs, then var a does have the value of 3, but it's not saying that it's equivalent in the beginning. It's actually saying that it's setting it equal to 3. So anytime you see an equal sign, just think it really means setting it equal to 3. So var a is setting it equal to 3 if you were going to translate this line right here. And I can put a comment in here that kind of says that. Var a is set equal to 3. That's what that represents. Okay. Now if you run this, nothing happens, but in the background something happens, obviously. In this case, the var a is set equal to 3, but to know what that variable is equal to, I'm going to print var a. Okay, so now if I run this, you'll notice it prints out the 3. One thing though that you're going to want to note on this is you're going to want to print with some context. Okay, so I'm going to put that in here. Print with context. Meaning, don't just print var a, actually print what it is. So I'm going to say var a is equal to, so I'm going to put this in quotes, is equal to var a. So by putting this in quotes in front of it, now when I run this, it's going to actually output some context to it. Var a is equal to 3. Okay, so highly recommend doing that. Print with context so you know what you're printing, so things make a little bit more sense. Okay, so just to recap, var a is a variable. That's why it's called var a. It's variable a. I set it equal to 3, and then I printed it to the screen. It printed out this text here. So it says var a is equal to, and then it printed the value here. So that's what you can see over here in this screen, the output. Okay, next thing that I want to talk about with variables is using meaningful names with variables. Okay, for example, say I said pi is equal to 3.14159. I'm just going to round it off. We don't need any more digits besides that. I'm going to say the radius is equal to 5. I'm just making up numbers at this point. But if you notice, I'm actually naming the variables specific values. I'm naming the variables with specific names so that we know what we're looking at. Then I'm going to say the area of circle, so area of circle is equal to pi times radius squared. So I'm just going to do radius times radius. Now we know what all the variables represent. Now if I wanted to, I could use p and r and a for the pi, the radius, and the area, but it doesn't really have any meaningful names. You are going to want to name them what they actually are. Do not just give them like letters or anything like that. You might know what they mean, but other people that are looking at your code will not. So you have to use meaningful names. Now if I run this, if you notice, it doesn't actually output that area of a circle. That's all in the background. So again, we're going to want to print this. So I'm going to print this really quick. Print with context. Area of the circle is the variable area of circle. something like that. And then if I run it, it's going to say area of the circle right there in the output. Okay, onward we go. Next thing we're going to be talking about is that variables can change value and will always be the most recent value assigned. Okay, so variables can change value if you write that in the code. So the example I'm going to use here, let's just say var b is equal to 2, okay, and then I'm going to print var b is equal to, and then I'm going to write var b here. So right now if I run this, it says var b is equal to 2 right here. So this line of code right here, this line of output I should say. But if I made another line and just said var b is equal to, I don't know, 7, and I print, here I'm actually going to just copy and paste this right here. Now it'll print the 2, but then it actually changes value and it'll be equal to 7. So as you can see right here, it was 2 there, and then it became 7. So main thing is what I wrote here in this comment, variables can change value and will always be the most recent value assigned. There are some examples of variables that cannot change value, but we're not really going to worry about that right now. For all intents and purposes, what we're doing in this video, they can change value. Next thing I'm going to talk about is data types. Okay, the data types that we're going to be focusing on in Python is int, float, Boolean, and strings. Okay, so I just kind of wrote those all right there. An int variable, so I'm just going to write int var, is equal, let's just say equal to 4 in this case. And then I'm going to say print int var has the following data type. I'll just write has the following type. And what you can do is you can actually write type in parentheses, then write type and then a parentheses afterwards, and write in there int var. And what this is going to do is it's going to print the int value, the int var value, which is 4, and it says has the following type, and that type is going to be an int. Okay, so the output, it'll actually tell you what kind of variable it is, what kind of data type it is. So right here it says 4 has the following type, and it says class int. That's an integer. Okay, an integer is a positive or negative whole number or 0. So 4 is a positive value, so that's why it's an int. So if I do this with a negative, it's still going to say that it's an int in there. So negative 4 has the value int. But if I put a decimal in there, let's just say negative 4.1, now it's actually going to change type. It's going to be a float type. So if I run this right here, it's a float. So when you see a float, what that really means is a floating decimal. Okay, that's what they call the decimal point for it. I don't want to mess with this code right here, so I'm going to change that back to negative 4. But I'm going to make a float var, and I'm going to set it equal to, let's just set it equal to 4.5. 4.5. And in this time, I'm just going to copy and paste this code because it's a little redundant here. And then we're going to say float var has the following type, and we're going to write float var in there. So now when we run this, 4.5 is the following type of float. The negative 4 has that int. So float is basically just what an integer was, but you can also have a decimal in it. If you write a 4.0 in here, like negative 4.0 in here, it automatically is going to turn it into a float because there's a decimal there. So it just kind of makes that executive decision. You know what? There's a decimal point in there. Even if you don't put a 0 in there, if you just put negative 4 point, it's still going to say that it's a float here. Okay. Now if you get rid of the decimal point here, you'll notice over here, it outputs to an int. Okay. All right. Boolean, we kind of talked about this a little bit in class, but we're going to go into more detail about this later. But for now, just know that a Boolean variable is either going to be true or false. Let's just do true for this first one here. And I'm going to print Boolean variable has the following type. Oops. Has the following type. And then I'm going to write type parentheses Boolean variable. So again, the way type works is you just write type and then whatever the variable is, and it's going to output what the type of that variable is. If I run this, you'll notice it says class bool. Okay, and that's what that means. I probably should have changed this here to say bool, but it's short for Boolean. And that's because it's a true or false. If I change this to, I don't know, false, it's still going to say that it's a bool right here. Bool, false, has the following type, bool. Now if I change this to a number, I don't know, like 5, it's going to say it's an int. If I run this again, it says it's going to int right here. Okay, but we want this to actually represent a Boolean value. It's either true or false. You can change the value if you want, but I'm just trying to show you how that works. String, we haven't really talked about strings yet, but a string is just a string of characters. So in this case, I'm going to write CS rules, computer science rules. And I'm going to print string var has the following type. Whoops. I'm going to say type string var. Okay, run this. It's going to say it's an str. Okay, CS rules. Okay, so yeah, we have numbers. We have numbers with decimals. We have whole numbers, negative, positive, 0. And then we have the decimal number with the float. And then we have the true or false values for a variable. That's the Boolean. And then the string is just a string of characters like, letters. It is important that you could actually put in numbers here if you wanted. Like I can just put a 1, 2, 3. But since there's quotes around it, it is going to treat it as a string because there's quotes. So if I run this, 1, 2, 3 has the following type of string there, even though it's numbers. Okay, but that's because it's in quotes. So make sure you understand that. All right, onward we go. Next thing we're going to talk about is inputting values. So let me see here. I'm going to write inputting value using the inputs method. Okay, so let me get some space here. Okay, so what we're going to do is, let's see here. Let's just do inputs variable. Again, naming these with context, and I'm going to write enter input. So it's going to tell me what's going on the screen here. So let me just run this. It's going to print all that other stuff that we had printing, but you'll notice at the very bottom right here it says enter input, and there's a little, cursor right here, and I can put a value in. So I'm just going to put some random numbers in and hit enter. Nothing happens. Okay, the input variable does have that value, that 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 4, 2. But nothing actually happens there. But one thing I do want you to notice, so what we're going to do is we're going to print input var. We're going to try to figure out the type for this input because Python defaults the type to something specific. Okay, so here we go. I'm going to run this. Okay, and it says enter input. I'm just going to say ABC and hit enter, and you'll notice it says it's a string. So it's ABC as the following type of string here. Okay, you do need to know that the Python defaults whatever the input variable to be as a string. So if I run this again, and I put like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 and hit enter, it's still going to be a string. Okay. The one thing that you can do though is you can cast. So it's called typecasting. You can actually change the type of the data type of the variable for the input. And to do that, what you have to do is just cast it by putting something like, let's say I wanted it to be an integer. I can put an int in parentheses around that input. So if you notice, it kind of like highlights the parentheses here. So now it's going to cast it as an int. So now if I run this and I write, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, it's going to treat it as an int, and you notice right here it prints it as an int. Now if I run this again and it says that it's casting it as an int, but I write like ABC, it's going to shoot an error on this because it's actually because it's not an int. ABC is letters, it's not an integer value. So if you notice it says a bunch of stuff here that's an error. It says value error, invalid literal. So it's a string literal for int with base 10. The int has to be an integer and it's not because ABC is a string, so it's outputting it that way. Okay, you can do the same thing here too if you wanted as making it a float. Okay, so I can put just some random number in here, hit enter, and then it outputs it as a float. Okay, so that's casting. You can put that thing in front of it. Otherwise, it defaults it as a string. So this is just some basics about Python. We went over variables, how to name them, making sure you use a meaningful name for it, how you can change the values. I did a little bit of math on here. We're going to talk about this in more detail later, where I did pi times radius times radius. We're going to talk more about the math stuff that you can do with this in a later video. I just kind of wanted to intro the data types for Python and just kind of how it looks with the code. I also showed you how input works as well. So that's basically an intro to variables and the assignment operator and data types. If you have any questions about anything in this video, let me know.